Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the important lecture sponsored by the Carey Institute at Wagner College with our guest speaker, Carroll. Now, I understand that many of you have 6 o'clock classes, and I told Mr. Carroll that we'll have to finish at about that time. I'm sorry for the inconvenience of some of you standing. We have brought some more chairs in, and we hope that, yeah, here comes some more chairs, as well as some more students. Before I start the program, before Mr. Carroll speaks, there's somebody in the room that I would like to state was conceptually and formally here at the Carey Institute when he was president of the college, and if not for him, there would not be a Carey Institute. I remember vividly, and I'm sure you do, Richard, the meeting that we had with the late Governor Hugh of blessed memory, and his son, when we decided to go ahead with the Carey Institute. There was only one other institute like this, and that's the Rockefeller Institute in Albany. The difference is they get state funding and we raise our money and fund it. And I want to thank Richard Hoffman for sponsoring this whole in memory of his parents, Al and Francis Hoffman. But President Garassi, I can never thank you enough as this continues into future years. What you did then and what you're continuing to do now, besides doing all the other things that presidents of colleges and universities have to do. And I'd like to introduce you now in terms of giving greetings to the people who are here. They're extending greetings.
I will be pleasantly short because we have a wonderful speaker, Mickey Carroll, standing right here. So I'll just say thank you to Richard Hoffman for sponsoring this again. Thank you for all being here. Probably one of the most pressing issues we have in our nation is trying to find efficient, effective, and representative government that works for everyone. We see what's happening in Washington today with stalemates, and you see those same stalemates in state legislatures. So the Carey Institute was started to look at ways which you can enhance issues of participation, involvement, engagement, issues of justice and equity, and opportunity. So without further ado, I want to just turn this back to Seymour. Thank you all for being here. We've had a history of wonderful lecturers, and Mickey joins this group, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, before we introduce the guest speaker, I'd like to introduce a new face to you, who perhaps in a couple of years will become an old face or a middle-aged face. He's new to the Carey Institute. He comes to us via the University of Pennsylvania, the John F. Kennedy School at Harvard University, and UCLA. I got to know him when he was the Albany director and the counsel to a state senator who happened to be the ranking Democrat on the Higher Education Committee of the State Senate. I'm not going to tell you who that was at the time, but you can guess. I'd like to ask, oh, you're standing already. Come find a seat. All right, Mark, raise your hand. Mark Rivlin came to us this summer. He's the assistant director and is now the interim director. And we expect many fine and good things from you, Mark, in cooperation with the students, the faculty, and the administration of the UL Carey Institute at Wagner College. And now, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Maurice Mickey Carroll. He is the director of the Quinnipiac University Polling Institute, and he's been at that position for almost 20 years, right, Mickey?
Something like that.
Something like that, okay. He brings more than 40 years of experience as a political writer and columnist for New York and for New Jersey newspapers. And here's a man who's been a writer for the New York Times, Newsday, and New York Post, and papers in Manhattan before that. And he's always had a name in journalism as a straight shooter, fair guy, and someone who writes very well, which is why he is the chief spokesman for Quinnipiac's New York and national polls, and works with Douglas Schwartz to develop, analyze, and present the results of the many polls conducted by Quinnipiac. Already I know that he's had a conversation with Richard Hoffman, and there's a difference of opinion as to who is going to win the mayoral. Okay. Mickey Carroll is not new to universities. He taught journalism at Columbia University, New York University, and Montclair State College, and presently teaches at Quinnipiac's Mass Communications program. He's a graduate of the University of Notre Dame. It's with a great deal of pleasure and pride, I want to introduce to you a star in this field, our good friend, Maurice "Mickey" Carroll.
You know, I'm just a former newspaper reporter. I tell funny stories and talk about the poll. And what I'm going to talk about will be, you're mostly political science students, I guess, but if you were English students, you realize the polling is a different language in a certain sense. But it really explains fairly easy stuff. The language is one of my shticks. I like, there's a story, maybe you've heard it, about the guy who all his life was educated well, but somehow or other he missed Shakespeare. Never got involved with Shakespeare. Until late in life, he's introduced to Shakespearean plays, and he says, oh, geez, he's blown away. He said, the stories, the characters, he said, this is a genius. He said, my only knock is the language. He said, the language is so trite. It's stuff you've heard 1,000,000 times. Okay? Well, I'll tell you one more language story. You ever hear about the girl that's trying out for the show? She says, hi. She sings. She says, I say tomato, you say tomato. I say potato, you say potato. Let's call the whole thing off. And the director said, well, geez, that's very, very nice, but I think you're not quite right for us, Miss Levine. She said, it's Levine. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about polling and the language of polling. Let's say, most of you are students, but let's say you're home, and you sit down at dinner, the telephone rings, and a young voice says she's calling from the Quinnipiac Poll. Now, that happens more than 1,000 times a week in 9 states, New York City, and then we take the results of these people we talk to. Then we go to Albany, New York City, I'll be in City Hall tomorrow, you name it, Hartford, Tallahassee, whatever, and with a bunch of news releases under our arm, and we give the waiting world the results of the stuff we found. Now, Seymour asked me here to tell you what we're finding and how we find it. So, let's start out with 2 questions. How come they never call me? Who here ever got called by a poll? Just raise your hand. Well, all right, that's more than we usually have. Okay, and the other thing, are polls any good? Well, sure they're good, because the news media eats them up. Newspapers, radio, TV, they use numbers and charts and comments and analysis, and the history book tells us that's what the Founding Fathers wanted, an informed public, right? And they're good because they help reporters get beyond that standard man-in-the-street stuff that we've all done, and staple of political reporting. Polls help reporters understand trends, group behavior. Those are the province of pre-election polls, plus tone. That's the specialty of exit polls. and for the broadcast people, an early call. And finally, polls are very good because, from my standpoint, very, very important, because they pay my rent. Now, they're bad. Why are polls bad? Well, they can diminish interest in politics. You know, it's all done. They mute the political dialogue. It's all over with now. We're going to get down to City Hall. I'll tell you about it a little bit, about de Blasio tomorrow. So why read the papers? Why do it on election day? Why not go shopping or something like that? Because it's all over with. The numbers are locked in. Your vote won't really count. And they're bad because they can oversimplify what an election is all about. You know, a poll is in plus or minus, yes or no. And politics, government, is much more complicated than that. They're bad because they over-focus on demographics. In other words, I am a middle-aged, male, Catholic, white-collar worker, lives in a big city, and it's none of your damn business how I vote. And you won't find out unless I tell you. But take 1,000 of me, 1,000 middle-aged, male, urban Catholics, you'll be able to tell within a point or two how we're going to do. Now, years ago, do you remember John Anderson, the most pompous man in the history of American politics, ran for president? And a friend of mine said he took a very principled stand, and he decided to vote for it after agonizing over it. He wouldn't do what he has always done, be a Democratic voter. He'd vote for John Anderson, the independent. And he did. Then after the vote, he was a poll maven. He looked up the Anderson exit poll data, how they voted. He said the Anderson vote was male, urban, college educated, Jewish, professional, 35 to 40 years old. He said they had me right down to the mustache. In other words, the polls knew who he was. So polls can get people thinking like that, and you shouldn't think like that. That's not what James Madison and all the other men down in Philadelphia had in mind. They wanted an informed series of individual elections. So anyway, polls are bad because they can turn elections into spectator sports. Now that's happened an awful lot lately, that it's not so much what people are for, or who they're, what they stand for, or what the issues are, but who's ahead in the horse race. So anyway, that's a pretty impressive litany of negatives, right? Let me quote one of the best pollsters in the business, Kathy Frankovic, no longer doing it. She was at CBS. Brought up in Garfield, New Jersey, by the way. If anybody knows New Jersey, if you're brought up in Garfield, New Jersey, boy, you know politics. Anyway, Kathy said, the polls are the new experts in town. Numbers don't just reflect reality, they create it. So they better be right, huh? Okay. Well, what we do isn't all that complicated. Let me tell you how we do it. On the edge of the Quinnipiac campus, there's a great big former garage building now with 120 computer stations in it. 7 days a week, 5 days, 2 nights, students and grown-ups, people from the community, sit down at those polling stations and ask questions. Questions? We decide what's of interest and put it into question form. That's not a science. It's an art. Stop and think. I could design a question right now on if you name the topic, it would tell you what we want, but that's not exactly what you don't want. What you want is genuine public opinion. So we frame the questions in such a way that with luck, we'll get a fair result. We won't get something that's sort of predetermined. Now, we blow it sometimes. The interviewers tell us, hey, they're getting arguments or unclear responses or whatever, so when it happens, we throw out the question. The polling. The trick, and it's explored way back in the 1930s by George Gallup, the Gallup poll, figured out the mathematics of this, that if you ensure that everybody in your sample has a fair chance of getting questioned, and if your sample reflects the overall demographics of the area that you're polling, that you will get an accurate number. Talk to 1,000 people, you can tell what millions. If this sample is accurate, we'll do it. The analogy is blood test, you know? In other words, when you have your blood test, they needle and pull out a drop. They don't take it all. One drop and that's enough. We'll tell you how all the rest of the blood is. We call it random digit dialing. Now, we know what percentage of voters were in 718 or 212 or whatever it is. So we asked that number of, that percentage of people within that area. That gets both listed and unlisted phones and cell phones. I'm sure a lot of you at your age probably have a cell phone and don't even have a landline. That's true, and is lately. So we have to ask both of them within that area. But that's not quite all. You know who answers telephones? You know? Well, I'll tell you, women. Women answer telephones. 70% of phone calls are answered by women. I've never been able to figure out why. We could do maybe some psychology. Are women more interested, more nosy? Are women subservient and are willing to stand back and do the work of answering? I don't know. But what we do is ask who in this household has the next birthday. That more or less has a demographically accurate result. And it's a process that has to be monitored regularly. We have people listening in, you know, how you work a telephone, where people, we have monitors who listen to people, the people who are polling. So, because we had somebody who said, what, Romney? You like him? Well, I mean, that's not a very good response, right? By a pollster. So we listen to these people. We listen to them and keep an eye on them to make sure that everybody behaves themselves. Now, why poll? Well, the simple answer is universities are in the knowledge business. And studies of current attitudes, political attitudes, that is knowledge. So we gather it. For the news media, we provide something that wasn't there when I was a reporter. And that is unbiased political information. It's good for our society to get that. It used to be in short supply. We'd get stuff from politicians who worked for, or from pollsters who worked for politicians. Good people, honest and so forth. But if they told us the numbers, obviously they had an axe to grind, right? Or else they wouldn't tell it to us. But this is this gives an unbiased, unloaded, if you will, poll, preliminary answer. That's the polling that you're reading about now that I'm going to go to City Hall with tomorrow. What about exit polls? Exit polls have caused all the trouble. Remember that Florida thing where it was Bush, then it was what's his name? Dole, not Dole, Gore. Then it was Bush again. The night went on, and finally they figured it was Bush. But it certainly cast a doubt on the polling process. Now, a friend of mine, a guy who was involved in this sort of stuff, told me what went wrong. You know how an exit poll works? A lot more numbers, a lot more people than are polled in a normal advanced poll of the sort we do. They talk to a lot more people. They pick sample precincts based on a study of how the area has gone in the past. Then, with those, when those sample areas, you get numbers, and if the numbers differentiate or to the extent that they vary from the numbers that they've done in the past, a good mathematician can predict the polling. Well, they said, based on the numbers in Florida, that they were told, after back and forth, they were told, the professionals, there were 50,000 votes out. And based on that, and it was 2 o'clock in the morning. And when I was a reporter, we wrote results a lot before 2 o'clock in the morning. We didn't have all those great numbers. But so they took the situation with the 50,000 out, predicted where it'd go, and came up with a result. But there weren't 50,000 out. There were 80,000 out. Now, would that make a difference? Well, in that, when it was as close as it was in Florida, that did make a difference, because all the 30,000 were out in the Panhandle. And the result was that everything was wrong. And an exit poll is supposed to be right, right? Now, what you're seeing now is a new style, a new type of news presentation. It's 24 hours news. You're accustomed to it. You know the first time this came out this way? What you're seeing now is not a tidily put together news story, but you're seeing the process of putting a story together. In other words, you now, as a listener, as a watcher, are getting stuff that an editor used to get. Reporters are out calling with stuff. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, some of it adds up, some of it doesn't. The first time, and that I was involved in, the first time that happened was in the Kennedy assassination. And that's, I think I told you, Seymour, I wrote a book on it because the result was, for 50 years, that story has been misunderstood. In other words, everybody, the one I wrote was, if you're interested, Ex Libris is the, what do you call it, the publisher, accidental assassin, Jack Ruby in 4 hours in Dallas, because for 50 years we've heard all this conspiracy baloney and had it underlined, if you will, by that, what's his name, the movie, JFK movie and so forth and so on, which is fiction, absolute baloney. Anyway, if you're interested. But let me, let's go back to polling. The New York Times started to tiptoe into polling when I was a political reporter there. And I said, hey, look, this is a mistake. Let's not do this. I said, pay your political reporters more money. We'll get the story for you, and you don't need to do it polling. But Frank Lynn, who was the #1 local political guy at that point, he was smarter than I was. And he disagreed. Look, he said, the politicians have pollsters working for them. They know this stuff. So they know more than we do. We're not doing a good reporting job. Anyway, Frank was right. So after fooling around for a few years, the Times started a poll of its own. We did it for him a couple of years ago in the presidential year. Siena College up in upstate New York is doing it for him now. But it isn't enough by itself. Everybody in the news business knows that most campaigns are not reported at all. So that you should have a reporter. Is anybody here from the Advance? You said there was going to be. So anyway, that you should be out there talking to politicians and so forth. Don't just go with polls. Although, in the current situation in New York and New Jersey, which I'm involved in, you could pretty well go with the polls. I'll be down at City Hall tomorrow with the, I can't tell you exactly the numbers because somebody would call the Advance, and then when I get down there and talk to the other reporters, they'd say, why did Staten Island have it? We don't. But what I did say, I can tell you this, de Blasio is so far ahead. The quote that I made up, I said, de Blasio, if these numbers hold up, I said, de Blasio's kids can start deciding who will get the best bedroom at Gracie Mansion. I mean, it is over. And then I'll be in Trenton next week, which is, for governor, it's also a little complicated. I don't know if anybody here's from New Jersey. Christie is your next governor. But did you see those stories about Booker, the Senate candidate, having a Twitter relationship with a stripteaser? Well, not smart. He'll probably still win, but not a smart thing to do. Now, when the losers in a poll, sometime we'll talk about things like, you know, Booker and his stripper. More often they'll talk about things like the demographics. My son is a politician in New Jersey. He said last year in Florida, Quinnipiac, we didn't have enough Democrats in the Florida, but of course it's not worth arguing about that. Our demographics are good. We got a professional who does that sort of stuff. And it added up. When I don't know if any of you are teaching or taking courses of the sort. When I teach journalism, I teach the students how to assess, how to work with a poll. Look at the track record. Have they been any good in the past? Look at the sponsor. Do they have an axe to grind? Would you trust any poll that came on abortion that came from NARAL? I mean, it may be honest, but you know that it's loaded. You know that they've got an axe to grind. Look at the specific question wording. Quinnipiac always says we put out exactly the questions we asked and precisely the numbers that responded to them. So that if you don't like my assessment, okay, look at the numbers and make your own assessment. That will tell you what it is. Look at how they did it. There's so many quickie polls, or what they call robo polls. I don't know if you get these calls, but you know, if you believe such and such, press 1. If you believe that and so, press 2. Bad idea. Bad idea. Not good enough. And be very, very suspicious of that stuff. And Quinnipiac tries to always do a poll long enough so we get a weekend. Weekends, it's a slightly different population that you measure on a weekend. And be very, very suspicious of those robopolls. Now, well, I'm not going to do this. I won't do this. I wanted to tell you about a couple of experiences I had as a reporter, but I think I won't, because it'll just screw up our narrative. Now, I tell you what's going on. Look, the current argument is and we've done polls on this, is this voter registration, you know what I mean? In how many states down south in particular are they trying to put in new voter restrictions? You have to show a photo ID or something like that. Well, it's pretty obvious what they're doing. It's the Republicans are doing it, trying to keep the Democratic vote down. You know, wouldn't you do it if you're a Republican politician? I would. I'd try anyway. And that's the kind of, and we found that people don't much like it. As they don't much like, in our current polls, the government shutdown. The funny thing is, we've polled Obamacare, and people are 50-50 on it. They like it, they don't like it. But what they don't like is the idea of holding it hostage, of using Obamacare, or using the debt ceiling as a trick, if you will, as a hostage. I'll take my bat and ball and go home kind of thing to get Obamacare. They don't have the votes on Obamacare. They just don't have them. If you can get the votes, fine, but they don't. They have a sizable enough minority to screw things up, but that's all. So anyway, so much for all of this stuff. Let me just say, and get back to where we started, okay? We started by saying if you get a phone call and somebody tells you they're from the Quinnipiac Poll, you know, it would be interesting. Some of you done it. I've gotten calls like that when we started this stuff. When we went into New Jersey, you're always worried, you know, that you'll be doing it right. I called my friend Joe Sullivan, or I planned to call my friend Joe Sullivan, Mr. New Jersey, who was going to tell us, I'd ask him if it was okay. Well, about 3 days into a 7-day polling cycle, one of the pollsters left a note for me. He said, we talked to a guy named Joe Sullivan, and he said, say hello to you, something. So I called Joe and I said, look, I know you're going to think this was a setup. But I said, you turned up in a random digit dialing. And the thing about polling that constantly amazes me is how often people turn up that I know. It's a rare week that one of the pollsters up in if we're doing Jersey or New York, say hello to Mickey. Somebody or other that I know, that knew me. And I asked Joe, I said, how was the poll? He said, yeah, it was a good poll. He said, good questions, you know, nice, polite, and so forth. They seemed to know what they were talking about. The poll, in short, added up. What I want to tell you about how a poll sets the standard, so to speak, because particularly those of you who are studying politics will know politics is not a really precise business. And elections are not precise. Did you notice that it took the Board of Elections in New York City something like 10 days to figure out who won the de Blasio-Thompson business? It does take, and what I used to do as a reporter, I love doing it, is a man in the street kind of stuff. In other words, I would go to a place and go back several times in the same place and measure people's attitudes. That's not a poll, that's a man in the street kind of thing, but in many ways it has more nuance, it has more shape because it runs through a reporter, the reporter's view. So I picked a place, over by Stuyvesant Town. Went there a few times, met Mike the Iceman and the district leader and so forth and so forth. And then the gimmick was that at the end of on election day, I was going to go there, you know, and write a story saying blah, 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 here's the way the vote went, and then at the end of the day, the numbers came out such and so. Well, for various reasons, they decided I had to write something more important too. So I went there early in the day, and the day started at, I don't know how many, you're all old enough to vote now. The people who run elections, there was a woman, like, remember that All in the Family, the TV show, that Edith Bunker, the mother? There was a woman who was a dead ringer for Edith Bunker who was running the election. And at 6 o'clock in the morning over by Stuyvesant Town, the first person showed up was a Republican of all things, it was a primary. So he went in to vote, and he stuck his head out the door, and he said, you know, he said, the machine's stuck. Something. She said, oh, I'm sorry. She said, I said it vote for a Democrat, that'll be all right. That was the end of the day. That was the beginning of the day. At the end of the day, we had sent another guy to get the final number. And he called back to 8:30 or there, or whatever it was, and said, gee, they're having some trouble with the machine, I'll get back to you. Called back about 20 minutes later and said, they're still having trouble. Called back half an hour later and said, I will change the quote ever so slightly. He said, the guy who runs the polling place, shoved the machine against the wall, said, screw the New York Times, and went home. There were 5,200 voting machines in New York City. We had picked this one place to do a story. 5,199 of them came up with their results. The one place we had picked in the whole damn city was the one that didn't come out. So anyway, you win a few, lose a few. Anyway, I'm gonna, I'm supposed to get you out of here in a few minutes. So let me just talk a little tiny bit more, and then if anybody wants to ask me anything, fine. Because I want to say, let's go back to where we started. You sit there at supper, and nobody calls. And then you read the paper or listen to the television or radio a couple of days later, and you find there was a poll. You think, geez, are they making this stuff up? Are they making this up? Well, no. We honestly do talk to people. They answer us, and I've told you, my friend Joe Sullivan turned up in the random digit dialing, as do any number of people. I was visiting my ex-wife one day, and she, one morning, pick up one of the kids, and the phone rang, and she said, it's Quinnipiac. So I got on it, but it wasn't. It was the Quinnipiac Poll. No, it wasn't me. They weren't looking for me. So anyway, we did New Jersey when I talked to Joe, and we found there, just as like every place else, interesting, significant stuff on public policy, interesting and predictive stuff on elections. So Kathy Frankovic, my CBS lady, was right. We're here. We have an effect on people's perceptions of government and politics, and it's important that what we report should be accurate. So, one of our folks calls, let the potatoes cool for a few minutes, okay? Answer the questions. You'll do us a favor. You'll make your voice count. I think you'll even do society a favor, helping us collect and spread unbiased information. That's what Quinnipiac does, and you'll help out. It won't take long, and we will be calling. So talk to us, okay? So thanks.
about 15, 20 minutes
Oh,
for
we got more than
questions
I
and
thought.
answers, so that you'll have a chance to participate in this town hall meeting regarding polling. But I would be remiss if I did not thank three people without whom this event tonight would not be possible. Megan Marin, my graduate assistant. Someone I've already introduced, Mark Rivlin. And someone who could not be here because she has 3 or 4 other things to take care of, that's Susan D'Amato. And one more thing before your questions start. I think you'll find this interesting. James Otto, the minority leader of the City Council, a Republican, as you know, is running for borough president. His chief of staff is the Republican candidate to succeed him as City Council. And I'm most fortunate, we're all most fortunate to have here tonight, that my former Staten Island chief of staff when I was in the New York State Senate is John Mancuso. And it's going to be a close race, Mickey.
Is it now on Staten Island?
It's Staten Island, yes. Welcome on, go ahead.
Anyway,
Questions and answers.
Anybody who has a question, fire away. And, yeah, so yell.
Just raise your hand.
I'll start off, Mr. Get started. I know Richard asked you this question earlier, but it would be interesting for the audience. How is polling adapted to the cell phone phenomenon?
I'll tell you, the technical stuff matters. It's not of any great interest, I'm sure, but the cell phones, it used to be that there weren't any cell phones. Now something like, God, at least half of people who have cell phones don't have landlines. So what we do, it's just technically quick, because we do the same thing with cell phones we do with landlines. We know what what percentage of these phones, if you will, what percentage of the total these will be. So we assess, we use those numbers roughly. The final 4 numbers, they're generated by computer. We don't have the faintest notion who they are. We don't know who you get called. We don't know who you are. And a lot of the numbers that are generated are lousy numbers. You know, they're what do you call it? They're businesses, they're non-working numbers, so forth and so on. But we call them, don't answer, and then we call another number. The cell phones, it's a little more complicated because somehow or other, the way they set it up, you can't have a mechanically, whatever you call it, automatic dial for a cell phone. You gotta dial the damn thing separately. So it just makes it more complicated. But it's like, it's like, for example, we get asked, do you poll in Spanish? Which in New York City you certainly have to. We do. You know what happens? Practically everybody who answers in Spanish, we say, you want to be interviewed in Spanish? We'd be glad to talk to you. Most of them say, no, doesn't make any difference, they'll do it in English. But you have to do it for practical, for political reasons. So in short, we get everybody, and we do it through a mechanical system. The results are the results. Anyway, fire away. Somebody asked me something. I'm a very interesting guy, to tell you the truth, and I would be glad to...
I want to hear the 2 stories you left out of your... I want to hear the 2 stories you left out of your speech about your newspaper history.
Huh?
I want to hear the 2 stories that you left out of your speech about your newspaper history. You said you had 2 stories in your speech.
I'll tell you later. I'm sorry.
How many more calls do you have to make to get someone now than you did 10 years
Yeah,
ago?
it's hard to say.
People
I literally don't know, because the regular phones are what do you call it, mechanically called. We'll have 120 people working on any given night, and what happens is that whenever they get free, boom, it'll bounce over the call to that given telephone. There's an awful lot don't answer, and you'd think You would think that if you're calling 1,000 people and getting 200 answers or some such thing, you'd think that it'd screw up the results, but it doesn't. We get real people, and we get real people who match the demographic pattern of the place of the area
So
where
there's been no
we're
research that the demographic has changed because of that? Because it just seems
No,
to
no,
me
that's-
when
that's-
someone answers the phone, it's been on who's calling.
Look, I'm a newspaper reporter, what do I know? But we got a guy up there, our poll director, PhD, blah, blah, in political science and in the statistical stuff. And he monitors it constantly to make, because we know the census tells you what the demographic pattern of any area is, almost. That's one way we can poll, for example, a city, a state, a congressional district. When you get to legislative districts, and I would love to do legislative districts in New Jersey. The question with Christie is not is he going to win, is can he bring in a legislature? So wouldn't you like to be a 3 or 4 significant legislative, but we can't do them because we don't have the demographics, and it would be murderous to try. So anyway, yeah.
You know, I think of myself, it's like I get called by polls all the time now, and most of them are push polls or polls that are being conducted by political campaigns.
Really?
So I just don't answer polls anymore.
I know.
But I wonder if the proliferation of push polling and the much more common use of polling by every political campaign has an impact on the results that you get.
It hasn't yet, because don't forget, you can check the results of an election poll pretty easily. The election. No, seriously, if our numbers are cockeyed, it'll show up on election night. So it hasn't yet. I'm inclined to think like what's your name? Ariana Huffington said, you ought to lie to pollsters, blah, blah, blah. Why do you? Although she's in the business of getting free coverage too. Nonetheless, it doesn't seem to have any effect yet. You have to wonder if eventually, like for example, one reason why New Hampshire is such a hard place to poll is because they're so self-conscious. They're all thinking, yes, I'll tell you what I think, but also they're trying to sort of weigh the results of what they. So New Hampshire is a miserable place to poll. And that's where everybody was wrong last time, remember? On the Clinton Obama thing. So that you have to, the answer is no now, but let's see what happens. Well, we'll see. We'll see.
Before the next question, I just want to introduce the gentleman who asked the last question, Professor John Esser, Chairman of the Sociology Department. Okay, thank you, John. Anyone else? Students, faculty, chairs?
There's a lady, right, I've been looking at her all the time. She was looking at me, and they always tell you when you talk, look at somebody. So I was looking at you, so what do you want to know?
That's why she's asking you a question.
Do you have a favorite place you like to poll?
Pardon me?
Do you have a favorite place you like to poll? Like a favorite area?
Oh,
where
no,
the
no,
people...
no, we poll 9 states and New York City. Like I'll be in City Hall tomorrow with, as I told you, this, the de Blasio thing. And I can't tell you numbers, but I'll tell you this, that he has, the city has changed. The city that I grew up in, and probably the city you grew up in, is not the same city that it used to be. Big immigrant population, but also big, much bigger black and Hispanic. And de Blasio is right smack on it. In other words, he wins among white voters. He wins among everybody, but he wins huge in the black community and Hispanic community. So in other words, the new pattern of New York City, de Blasio has it. He's with it. But as far as, we poll, as I said, 9 states, 1 city. I grew up in New Jersey. I get a kick out of polling New Jersey, partly because Christie is such a piece of work. And he is. And partly because it's an interesting election. You have, anybody here who's here from New Jersey? Give me, oh, yeah, okay, well then you know. You got a crazy election with a perfectly legit candidate, Barbara Buono, the state senator, who is getting wiped out by Christie. And then the Booker, did you see the stories about Booker and the stripteaser? Brooker was in Twittering or something. He ought to have his head examined. But anyway, I get a kick out of Jersey just because, you know.
Is that going to be close, the
Nah.
senatorial?
It'll be closer than it should have been. We measured him, Booker was ahead by 12. He should be ahead by more than 12, but 12 is pretty good with a couple of weeks to go. Anyway.
All right, any other questions?
Quickie.
Yes.
Briefly, just when you're trying to come up with a representative sample, what demographics do you have most problems with? Like, do some people routinely not answer the phone or harder to track?
No, it's a good question. You know, would there be a segment of the community that's just more anti-polling than other? There probably is, but it hasn't shown up yet.
Right.
Don't forget, we're polling roughly 1,000 people.
Right.
I suppose, you know, there could be some demographic little area that we wouldn't, but it hasn't shown up yet. Maybe it will, maybe it will. It's just like when people finally get fed up with polling and decide they don't want to talk to us. Yeah, but at this stage of the game, the protections that I told you about, you know, like one drop of blood, not all the blood, the, what do you call it, the birthday business, the designing the demographics of who we measure to match the demographic. So far it works. I'm inclined to think that one of these days maybe we'll go back to what I did for a living, which is reporting. Reporting is fun, you know. I don't know if anybody if any of you, you know, you won't make any money, but if you decide to have some fun, no, you won't. As a reporter, you don't make a dime unless you're Dan Rather or somebody like that. But it's a good job. It's fun. Much more fun than polling, I'll tell you. I'm sorry.
Richard Hoffman?
What's the economics of polling?
Oh,
You're a public poll, right? No one pays you for the polls.
No, Quinnipiac is not for sale. It cost a fortune, well, this is just among us guys, okay? John Leahy, our college president, who is a genius of a president, I bet you he might even be better than, he's up with you anyway.
I don't think so.
He's up there.
I know John started medical school this year, started the law school, and John started the poll. And the reason, he didn't want to admit it at first, but the obvious reason is to attract attention to Quinnipiac, which attracts students and contributors. But the faculty doesn't like us because we make more money and we have more fun. So he's got the whatever, it costs a lot of money, I'll guarantee you. But what it is, only he knows. The pollsters are paid out of one pocket, I'm paid out of another one. We got this building, we got computers, we got telephones and stuff. So it costs a fortune. But
So he gets it back in advertising and public relations.
you couldn't get a few years ago, people would say, you know, a poll by Quinnipiac University, a school in Hamden, Connecticut. You know what they say now? A Quinnipiac poll, in other words, we got the identification. And John is a great big Irish, you know, I covered him when I was a reporter. I covered that damn St. Patrick's Day parade every year for eons. So we got to know each other. And he always has a big Quinnipiac contingent marching up in the St. Patrick's Day parade. And Judy, his wife, marched with me. She said, there's going on people on up 50, and people on, hey Quinnipiac, poll me. We got the identification. So in short, it must be worth it. You know, whatever it costs, must, you know, they decided it's worth it for Quinnipiac. Anyway, I think you guys are supposed to get out of here now, aren't you?
Let me also say that I heard from the manager of the Wagner College bookstore, came over to me and said, you wouldn't believe it. Yesterday I got a call from a polling agency, and I said, which one? He said, the big one, Quinnipiac.
Incidentally, I covered you,
That's
Carey.
Rocco.
I covered you, Carey, who was, I don't imagine that for the Carey Institute, talks about the time he dyed his hair orange or any of that stuff. But he was a good governor.
Any more questions?
Thank you.
And if anybody has anything else, and you don't have to go over it, I'll stand here for
Good.
a little bit.
Thank you very, very much.